Hi, my name is Sari Sudhakaran, and in this video, let's see what Ridley Scott had to do to make Blade Runner so different from any other films of the time that it looks like $1,000,000 even today. Blade Runner was sort of a disaster at the box office. It was 29th or so in 1982. Even though it did make some money, it was a huge disappointment considering its budget. E.T. and The Wrath of Khan were less than half its budget, but were huge hits. A lot of people were and still are turned off by the poor characterization and confusing plot in Blade Runner, but it stands out even today for being an incredibly beautiful film to look at. E.T. and Star Trek look dated, but most of Blade Runner could still pass off as a modern film. And what's the secret? Blade Runner is significant in cinematography for its pioneering use of practical and visual effects, and a distinct visual style that was so detailed and lifelike it put Star Wars to shame. It set new standards in creating an immersive, atmospheric world. It influenced the sci-fi genre and inspired countless filmmakers. If you haven't seen it already, Blade Runner is a science fiction film directed by Ridley Scott. It is an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's novel To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. Apparently, it is a faithful adaptation of the novel. The cinematography of the film is by Jordan Cronenweth. Production design is by Lawrence J. Paul, and it is set in a dystopian future where a Blade Runner, played by Harrison Ford, is tasked with hunting down replicants, in other words, androids. The film explores themes of identity, humanity, and ethical questions about artificial life. These questions are more relevant today as was in 1982 with AI, and will be more so in the future. What's most instructive to student filmmakers is how Ridley Scott managed to make Blade Runner look so stunning and lifelike. What techniques did the crew use? Let's take a look at those things and then we'll look at a scene to see how it all comes together in practice. The really big secret of Blade Runner is its production design. It was nominated for an Academy Award. There was no way it could have not won if not for a certain film that was and continues to be one of the greatest miracles of filmmaking. Google it, you'll see. Now here's a plan of the Blade Runner set built at a studio. The horizons were filled in with visual effect matte paintings, but most of it is already there in the flesh and blood. The design and layout were inspired by futurist architect Antonio Santaglia. I urge you to watch Fritz Lang's Metropolis, because both movies share quite a bit of similarities of the future world they are showing. Ridley Scott worked with concept artist Sid Mead so he could flesh out the world. The production design team then had to build what was necessary. If you study the scenes of Blade Runner, you'll see Ridley Scott try to make the maximum use of every single location. There are very few portions he didn't take full advantage of. They also shot in real locations, the most famous of which is the Bradbury Building in LA. It's clear a majority of the budget went into production design and the visual effects, but filming was another huge pain for everyone involved. The first thing you'll notice about Blade Runner is most of it takes place at night. Night shoots are very hard for everyone. Blade Runner was shot over 50 days of night. Not only does it take a toll on the actors and crew, but it dramatically increases the lighting budget. I'll cover lighting and cinematography a bit later. Night helps to hide a lot of the imperfections in the set. To complicate matters, Ridley Scott wanted rain. It rains throughout Blade Runner. Most of it is not digital rain, it's really rain pouring down on everything. The sets, actors, costumes, and crew. This amount of rain might have put Rashomon to shame. They had sprinklers on top of the set, and obviously they needed extensive plumbing to get rid of all the water. They also added tons of smoke. You can see smoke literally everywhere. And some of it is really distracting because there's no real logic to it. Why I say that is because rain typically removes smoke from the atmosphere, even if it's pollution. But the logic in Blade Runner was that the smoke was justified because the future world is very polluted. The reason they actually used smoke was the light could disperse and give enough fill exposure, otherwise it would have been too dark or too difficult to light. It added a great deal of style to the way Jordan Cronenweth wanted the film to look like. It goes without saying all of this is hard to do over a long stretch of filmmaking. It takes a lot of people, not to mention the time involved. But that's why Blade Runner really stands out today. The attention to detail and the insane trouble Ridley Scott put himself through is why Blade Runner looks gorgeous even today. Compare it to The Wrath of Khan, and you can see how going the extra mile today could ensure the longevity of your film. Think about it. People are still talking about Blade Runner today. How many even remember The Wrath of Khan? Here's Google Trends data if you don't believe me. E.T. is higher than Blade Runner. It was a monster hit and still is a great film. Note, I'm using the 1982 film specifically so it doesn't confuse the 2049 film. The 2049 Blade Runner is currently neck and neck, but I don't think it will last the test of time. The Wrath of Khan is well below the rest. By the way, Blade Runner 2049 has its own filmmaking style, and I have a video about it on my channel. Please check it out. If someone asked me in 1982 which was the better film to watch, I'd probably have said Wrath of Khan or E.T. Today I'd say E.T. is still the best entertainer all around among these three, but if you ask me about production values and beauty, Blade Runner is really above the rest. Above anything that came in 1982. Maybe Raiders of the Lost Ark is pretty much there as well. Now let's talk about the cinematography of Blade Runner. Ridley Scott wanted Blade Runner to have the lighting style of Citizen Kane. Greg Toland was a cinematographer of Citizen Kane. If you want to understand his cinematography techniques, I have a video on this channel as well. Citizen Kane had a high contrast look with strong camera angles. Now let's switch over to black and white to focus on the lighting. The first major lighting choice in Blade Runner was the use of strong shafts of light, mostly in interior shots. They're hard to miss even if you don't know anything about lighting. The logic behind this was these lights represent an invasion of privacy. It was clearly stated by cinematographer Jordan Cronenberg that this was the primary intention of these lights. One curious aspect to it is it's usually only present where Deckard is alone or when Rachel or another replicant is with him. It's a subtle hint as to Deckard's identity. For example, it's not present when he's in the captain's office or when he's investigating. It's there every time he's in his apartment. The light forces its way through the window somehow. It also invades Tyrell Corporation when he's giving Rachel a test. It also crashes through the Bradbury building, which sets the stage for the climax of the film. Lots of replicants in that scene. Where we don't see the shaft of light though is in the final scene at Deckard's apartment. Somehow, the spotlight is off him in this scene, so he can escape with Rachel. After an entire film of shafts of light following him, the lack of one in this scene does make a subtle impact. They used high-powered xenon lights to achieve these shafts of light. They're pretty much like laser beams. Gaffer Dick Hart is credited for coming up with the idea of using xenon spotlights. These lights could be spotted or in flood mode. They got pretty hot. You could bounce them off mirrors and water to create these water reflections where you don't expect it to see water. When the shafts of light was sunlight, as in Tyrell's office, they used arc lamps. Smoke really brings out the beam, the shafts of light on camera. Indirectly, these lights also highlight the amount of smoke in the room, which is unnatural. Of course, the world of Blade Runner is polluted, and that justifies the smoke. It reminds me of Mumbai, where I live. Working with smoke is time-consuming, and in 1982 wasn't that healthy either. In scenes without smoke, the cinematographer used low-contrast filters on the lenses, so it gave the same kind of soft look. If anyone thinks these effects were achieved by throwing together a couple of lights, I wanted to dispel that idea. It takes a lot of trial and error to get this right. You can see the attention to detail in all things cinematography on this film. If it was so easy, everybody else would have done it by now. But it's hard to replicate even today. It's one of the great crimes that Jordan Cronenberg did not even get a nomination for Blade Runner. I mean, if Tootsie could get it, I just can't fathom the lack of foresight. Coming back to the cinematography, the other main lighting effect you see in Blade Runner is the flickering light. The flickering light is actually a byproduct of neon lights flickering. They typically flicker at full intensity or when the camera speeds up to record slow motion. When they did not want the lights to flicker, they had it on dimmers. You can see neon lights everywhere in the Blade Runner exteriors. Everything was augmented with neon lights. At one point, they had 7 people just to handle the neon lights. The extras on the street that carried umbrellas had fluorescent tubes hidden in them to light their faces. There's something about the organic nature of neon lights that LED lights just don't have. Watch modern day Blade Runner and Alien films and you'll see the difference. And nowadays, you have LED lights that don't even flicker at 120 FPS. Sometimes it's the mistakes that set you apart from everyone else who's trying to replicate the norm. Overall, the lighting of Blade Runner has strong backlight and contrast. The faces are softer, usually lit from below or bounced off surfaces. When they were lit with hard light and they were considerably warmer. That's part of the Jordan Cronenberg style. Then we come to the color in Blade Runner. A lot of the color effects were achieved with gels and color sources. For example, in the ice room, the color cast is slightly greener. I'm guessing this is because they used HMI lights specifically here, they had to, and in 1982 HMI bulbs had a lot more green cast than they do now. Color separation is everywhere in Blade Runner. Warm and blue is the predominant tone. They used a lot of techniques to get this tonal separation. And finally we come to the camera, lenses, and format. Blade Runner was shot in anamorphic. The oval bokeh and flares are a dead giveaway. One thing about the anamorphic format is it helps in creating a claustrophobic effect because there's less top and bottom space. It helps make the interiors look smaller than they are. They use Panavision C-series anamorphic lenses, and Ridley Scott is known for using longer focal lengths, probably mostly above 50mm and typically even above 75mm. They also had a few wide-angle shots. I've created videos about what makes anamorphic lenses different, so please watch those if you don't know. Ridley Scott was a fan of the anamorphic format in this phase of his career. With long telephoto lenses, you could stuff people in the frame and make the world of Blade Runner a lot more packed than it really was. Now let's go over a scene to discuss the role cinematography and production design played to enhance and bring together all the pieces of Blade Runner together. We look at the scene after when Pris arrives at Sebastian's home, and he shows pity on her and invites her in. First, let's notice the set itself, especially the ceilings. Tall ceilings are reserved for Tyrell employees. It's in the first scene, it's in the scene when Deckard meets the captain, and Sebastian's home is tall, Tyrell's home is tall as well. But it's low for Deckard and the others. They're second-class citizens. The low ceilings in Blade Runner were built to enhance the feeling of containment, a motif particularly well suited to the anamorphic format, so everything looks even more cramped. So when Sebastian brings her home, the shafts of light are stopped by the door. It's a clear demarcation of space. These shafts of light don't penetrate into the employees of Tyrell Corporation. They're not the one being hunted here. Sebastian's place is filled with relics from the old world. He's a collector who is somehow brilliant enough to play chess with the boss. Right in the first shot, you notice there's tons of smoke in the room, and then there are pockets of light around the set, and one main light down on Sebastian with black wrap around it. It's a soft lighting setup, which is different from the rest of the film. After this, we move into close-ups. Then Roy arrives and we see the xenon lights piercing through the Bradbury building. Now this is what the Bradbury building really looks like. I can't imagine the amount of smoke required to get this effect. It looks amazing, and Ridley Scott made full use of this. There are many shots of this. Now in the opposite view of the apartment, you can see the searchlights coming into the set, and everything else is lit by the fill light from lights bouncing off the smoke. The very first shot of the second time we see the scene is when Pris has a white face paint on, so she stands out from the dark set, and the set has a sort of red color gel applied to the lights to give it a pink hue. So this separates where she's sitting from where Sebastian's sitting. The set takes on a blue tinge overall, and the characters are lit with warm sources. This helps achieve color separation. Also, it introduces warmth into a cold scene, emotionally speaking. The world of Blade Runner is brutally inhuman place, but humans will find warmth wherever they can. Obviously, Sebastian's house is his sanctuary, just as Deckard's house is also lit with warm lights most times. We're supposed to identify most with Deckard and Rachel. They also use a special setup to get a strange glowing catch light used specifically for replicants. This involved using a special beam splitter that allowed half the light to go through and the other half to reflect back. It was placed at a horizontal angle and light was reflected off of it into the actor's eyes. That's a lot of trouble to go through. The third time we see the scene is when Deckard arrives. It again begins with a close-up of Pris with a rose-colored look, so she's gone back to her place or her spot in Sebastian's home. And Deckard is shown the light is hard, it's no longer soft. It's the same location but the lighting changes. So when we finally see the wide shot again, the colors and lighting, they're totally different. There's a wash of red and green, and the lighting is harsher with harder shadows. The time of day is hard to place here. This change in lighting was on purpose, of course. The warmth and safety that was present when Sebastian was there is no longer present. Now it's dangerous and uninviting, almost horror-like. The change also takes place in Pris and how she looks. While she was soft and beautiful earlier, she looks like a demon now. She was all grace, but she dies gracelessly. When Roy arrives and the final fight begins, the shafts of light burst through the windows again. It follows Deckard wherever he goes. There's also flickering or pulsating light in the scene to increase the suspense. Roy toys with Deckard and steals the scene. You know more about Roy than you do about Deckard by the end of Blade Runner, and that's probably the film's undoing. Why did Blade Runner fail at the box office? The film uses a relatively slow pace, allowing the audience to immerse themselves in the world and contemplate its deeper philosophical questions. This has been a point of contention, with some finding it ponderous and others considering it a strength. I have no issues with the meandering pace. I love the immersion it provides. But where the film fails is, my opinion, there's no payoff. I'm immersed in this fantastic world, I'm sold, but the story being told doesn't match the production values, and the characters aren't that powerful or memorable. Anyway, to answer the question posed in the title, Blade Runner still looks great today because of the immense attention to detail that went into all the aspects of filmmaking: sets, costumes, lighting, cinematography, acting, everything except the screenplay and story. But I can watch it again and again forever, because it's just so beautiful. Thank you for watching, and please check out this video for more amazing insights. See you in the next one.